What's good, y'all? Today I have a bit of a shorter video where I'm going to be spotlighting a specific ride and giving my in-depth opinions and thoughts. Today I'll be reviewing Great Bear at Hershey Park, the B&M invert that opened in 1998. The coaster stands at a height of 90 feet but has a drop of 124 feet following a helix. Great Bear goes 58 miles an hour and from start to brakes lasts just over 45 seconds. I've always had a soft spot for Great Bear because it was my first ever major roller coaster when I rode it for the first time in 2011. I've ridden a lot of B&M inverts since my first ride on Great Bear, and while Great Bear still holds its own, it's definitely not as refined as some other ones. After the lift hill, you go into a unique helix which aligns the train for the first drop. The first drop isn't particularly punchy, but it is overall pretty nice. The ride consists of 4 inversions, starting with a vertical loop and an Immelman. These are pretty typical for any B&M invert, although I do like the forces from the loop in the back row. These elements are rather close to the pathways, which allows for some nice photo opportunities. After the Immelman is a 0G roll, another basic element for a B&M invert. Great Bear then swoops over some pathways and heads left over the creek, which features some really funny looking supports. This section of Hershey Park is called the Hollow, and it is fitted with many rides that are built on top of each other into a small space. Before it finishes the final inversion, Great Bear has to wait until it passes underneath Super Duper Looper's lift hill, which leads to some unusual profiling in this section. This is followed by a twist around Super Duper Looper's loop and into the brakes. Overall, I've always had a positive impression of Great Bear, and it's been the B&M invert that I've ridden the most consistently. Like I said, I still think Great Bear holds its own even when compared to models with better stats. I do think what gives Great Bear its character is the uniqueness of the layout, as the elements themselves are quite basic for this type of ride. That's not to say the elements are bad, but they are not very inspired. While space was definitely a factor, I do think adding 1 to 2 more inversions to this ride would have gone a long way. Besides that, this ride has everything else going for it. It's smooth and comfortable for an invert, and it's a great coaster to do early in the day when you go to the park. Typically, I will get in line if the queue is filled up to just where the long narrow pathway ends. If you have been in this line, you know what I'm talking about. Typically, if the line ends about here, it's about a 30-minute wait, which I think is completely reasonable for this ride. With the new additions of Candemonium and Wildcat's Revenge, Great Bear isn't as much of a ride that people run to as immediately as it used to be, so definitely take advantage of that if you really want to ride this ride. For Great Bear's overall score, I'll be giving it an 8 out of 10. B&M invert-wise, I think it's about middle of the road, and I'd consider this ride most similar to Talent at Dorney Park, which is about an hour up the road from Hershey Park, although I think I would consider Great Bear to be the better ride of the two. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this review and found it useful. That's all I have for you today, and I'll see you in the next one.